I'm Lindsey. Joining me today is André.
Hello!
Hello, André. And another regular host here on the Roundtable, Deanna.
Hi there.
Hi, so thrilled to have you both with me today. So to dive in, I first started dabbling in narration in 2017, squeezing ACX books in around my day job and theater work. In 2019, I decided to make a proper go of it and attended my first APAC. Looking back now, I feel like my starting dates were simultaneously too late and also just in the nick of time. From where I sit, there seems to have been an interesting expansion and contraction in narration opportunities over the past 20 years or so. First, an industry based largely in New York and LA, most books recorded in a professional studio, a sense of when you're in, you're in. Then to the advent of home studios and ACX and expanding opportunity. And finally, a sort of contracting and feeling of scarcity as a huge wave of new narrators joined the industry during the beginning of the COVID pandemic and the SAG strikes. Today, I frequently hear from narrators worried about oversaturation, and I share those feelings myself. Personally, I've never had a period of ease when it comes to finding this work. The audiobook hustle has been much more productive for me than the theater hustle, but I still feel constantly on the hunt, and I have at least a couple famines each year. I've never had a year that was 100% booked to my liking. The regular hosts here at the Roundtable are mostly in that in-between time, starting this work sometime in the 2010s or right after. I'm curious about what this landscape looks like to a more experienced narrator, and to someone newer to the business. So today, we have two incredible guests. Let's dive in. I've long been a fan of our first guest host as both a narrator and as a person. Hillary Huber is both a legend and a boots-on-the-ground realist in this industry. She is also a lover of travel, hiking, bourbon, hip-hop dance, throwing dinner parties, yoga, laughing, and knitting. She splits her time between New York and LA and lives with her husband, 2 kids, and thriving sourdough starter. Welcome, Hillary.
Thank you, Lindsey. Happy to be here.
So thrilled to have you. Our second guest host is Dara Brown, who is newer to audiobook narration, but not to storytelling. I first met Dara at an APA mixer in Chicago and was instantly struck by their warmth, curiosity, and presence. They are a singer, actor, audiobook narrator, energy worker, and life enjoyer. Dara loves storytelling in all its forms and believes that oral storytelling offers us a connection not only to each other, but to our ancestors. They live in Chicago with their partner JJ and their beautiful angel of a cat, Waffles. So glad to have you, Dara.
I'm so happy to be here.
Now, I'm curious as to your thoughts, both of you folks, as to sort of the timeline that I laid out at the start here. What has been your experience with that, expansion and contraction, or has your experience been different?
I think COVID was a massive game changer. Everybody thinks that was a massive game changer. And I think it's not only for what you mentioned, which is that other actors started entering this field. But I think the biggest change was accessibility to producers. So prior to Zoom and Clubhouse and Instagram and all of the other platforms where we have all become talking heads, to meet a producer, you had to go to an event. And you had to generally be in LA or New York. Every now and then the APA would throw something in the Midwest. But that was the only opportunity you got to mingle with these people. And when I first started, I remember, you get a hold of somebody's email address at Penguin Random House. It was just Random House then. And you'd be like, oh my God, I got an email address. It was like bananas. And now they're everywhere going, you want an email address? You get an email address. All of a sudden I realized I should have that. You get an email address and you get an email address and they're handing them out left and right. So they're so much more accessible than they used to be. And they're out there clamoring for new voices. I remember when I first approached Tantor and And I had done, I don't know how many books, not very many. And they said, oh, sorry, you need to have done 35 books before we'll even look at you. And nobody's like that anymore. So I think that is a very significant change. People are working for publishers right out of the bat. And before you kind of had to, put in your time, I felt like, which was hard to do because we didn't even have ACX. I mean, I feel like I'm going to be that old lady who's like, we had to narrate uphill both ways in the snow. But we did. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I'm so curious about that. And especially comparing to your experience, Dara, because I remember starting and going on to the Facebook groups and still seeing that even in 2021, just everyone being like, don't email Penguin Random House if you haven't done 60 books already.
Yeah.
And I'm also watching tons of newbies do their first book with Penguin. So like, Dara, what has your experience been like starting recently?
Yeah. When I first started, that was something that I had heard a lot was, the kind of expectation that to really get in contact with big publishers that you needed to have done some certain amount. I think I actually emailed you about this at some point, André, when I was starting out. And it hasn't necessarily been the case. I mean, I think my fourth or fifth book was with Penguin, but it was really through a connection that I had made in person. And so, I've heard different things. I've heard, both sides, but I've also, I've seen a lot of different experiences while being in a lot of the Facebook groups and talking to people who are primarily working on ACX. I think there can be a lot of fear created with that expectation. It's like, if you do reach out before you've had this, these years of experience, then you might be making a really bad impression. But it hasn't been my experience necessarily. It's been interesting. It's not what I expected at all getting into it.
I'm also wondering, Hillary, I think by the time the pandemic was rolling and people had really been, ACX was also kind of the start of the home studio expanding across the country. But it seemed like the pandemic was this moment of expansion of they're really looking for everybody. They're really reaching out to new people, etc. Was there a moment for you before the pandemic where you started to feel that suddenly there's more faces, suddenly maybe you're getting fewer jobs from someone, or you have to what was that time around 2020 like?
I don't really remember as significant an influx as we experienced during COVID. And part of that might be because we couldn't really see who was doing the work like we can now before COVID. Now you get on a Clubhouse and all of a sudden there's 50 people you've never heard of going, I'm an audiobook narrator in the Clubhouse. So I guess I just don't really know when. Well, I do know when there was a time. I'm really bad with dates, y'all. I had to look up to try to figure out when I started by looking at my oldest book, which unfortunately was re-released in 2015. So it's doesn't even show its original date, but it's been 20 years. But I do remember there was a time when Amazon and Audible started recording started recording a ton. Will you beat me if I swear?
No, you totally can.
Okay. They started recording a shit ton of back titles. Okay. Tons and tons of back titles. And all of a sudden, these producers like Deanna and Skyboat had these massive contracts with Audible. And they were like, your plumber can read out loud? Bring him in. We'll record him. And they threw this huge wide net to bring in anybody with a pulse to read an audiobook. And they built that. Dion built their whole Northridge studio based on that. Skyboat expanded their whole operation based on that. And that was a real swell period. Again, I'm not sure when that was. And eventually it tapered off again. But that was one surge, and this is the next surge.
Yeah, the ACX trajectory was interesting for me because I got in. I started dabbling in like 2017, and as we got closer to 2020, I felt almost like I had missed this wave on ACX when there used to be books with stipends attached to them. Like people talked about finding books on there that were like these huge bestsellers or that were like really, really high quality or really big
off of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And not anymore,
but I feel
right?
I'm sure that there's still some diamonds in the rough, but I felt like the longer I was on there, the more I had to dig to find anything that wasn't like run through Google Translate or created with AI or any other number of things.
Do they still do the no, I don't think so. They used to do that contract, that 13-week contract. No, you're all looking at me like I'm
to my
crazy,
knowledge, they don't
right?
do that anymore.
It was a 13-week contract.
Your 13 weeks, they just give you anything for 13 weeks?
There was a limit. I think it was however many hours allowed you to qualify for health insurance. Mm-hmm. So it was calibrated to that. But there was also a chance that they wouldn't give you that many books, but you got paid regardless. So there were a bunch of narrators doing that because they're like, this is guaranteed work. It was a set fee. I think it was whatever the minimum was to make your health insurance, and it came out to something like, I don't know, 10 finished hours a week. It might have been more than that. It might have even been 15. It was a lot of work. I didn't do it, but I have friends who did. So, people were working and making money on ACX doing that too. And the stipends, and I don't know. ACX wasn't around when I started. I have a real love-hate relationship with it for that very reason. Number one, I think I love it because I think it allows new narrators to work right off the bat, and gain experience and gain a library of work. But by the same token, asking people to work for free is kind of sucky.
I'm curious, how have you seen that like indie versus pub work, like, and also where people enter the industry? Like if you're seeing more people enter through publisher work now versus entering through indie work before? Because I know you work with a lot of students coming in brand new.
Yeah. Yes, but to both of those things. None of us did any indie work. That's a whole new thing, that concept really, or very few did, that you could actually go out and sort of hustle up your own work. But I think that that's a big result of the changes in the publishing industry as well. The authors are getting incredibly disillusioned with the shrinking profits in standard traditional publishing. So a lot more are publishing independently. So that surge in that market has certainly fed our market. But definitely newer people are having an opportunity to work with publishers more. And definitely the indie way, which I when I was first teaching, I never really kind of encouraged that because it seemed sort of daunting to me. But now I really do, because you can make much more money working direct. You're cutting out the middleman, essentially, working directly for the authors. And I guess in the romance realm, it's bananas. So many of them are self-published, right? Do any of you work in that realm? Everybody's going to writers' conferences all the time, all over the country, and getting all these romance authors. So it just seems to me there are a lot more opportunities. And there are also just in the number of books being published, right? And what, double digit growth every year. 2000, there were 7,000, 6,000 books produced in 2007. That's nothing compared to now. So there's a lot of opportunities abounding, but like you said, there's a lot more narrators.
It's been so fascinating because when I had my first like summer on ACX, it was so like I didn't know how to connect with anyone. I wasn't on Facebook groups. There was nothing. I wasn't in anything at all. And it was so kind of like my A24 movie summer. Like I bought my little like recording setup and like I auditioned for a book, and then I think they gave it to me because I followed up about it. It was a month past and I was like, have y'all cast this yet? And then they just sent me the offer right after that. But it was such this like mystical thing, and I, you know, the wind was blowing through my hair as I like spoke into the
You're so
microphone or
lyrical. Wait, what year was that, André?
That was 2020. That was summer of 2020. Yeah.
Okay.
I remember this pivot because I didn't start narrating more books expecting to make it a job. I started narrating more books because I just really liked it and I was making time for it outside of my full-time job. But it was all, when I expanded, it was via ACX and building relationships with people on ACX auditions and getting return clients from ACX. But there was a moment where I got my first publisher offer. And then suddenly it was like, you can find coaches. You can go to conferences. You can sign up for the APA. You got to send email reach outs. They got to be quarterly. You're going to like put together a portfolio. There's awards to submit to. Like, it just like bounced off. And Dara, you're nodding along. Like what's resonating? What was your like journey through this?
Yeah, no, I mean, that just, it felt like a match for me because there was, yeah, it felt like a lot of pressure kind of came on once I worked with a publisher. I was like, oh, now it's like, it feels very serious, just like talking to people, you know, having made some friends in the city who are narrators and kind of just seeing what their experience has been like Lindsey and, you know, another friend of ours. But yeah, I mean, I haven't had a lot of success on ACX. I've tried, and I still do. It's difficult though because it is such a huge volume of narrators auditioning on there, and so you know, it feels, actually to me it feels like I'm, I guess, competing with more people when I'm doing that. But yeah, it did feel it did become a lot more like, now you have to be on this career trajectory, which I do struggle with a little bit sometimes. Just like being on any kind of career trajectory, I'm like, huh, a little.
Because it's so, and is that because it's so antithesis to the artistry of why you started doing it in the first place?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Because it's so much about like the joy of it. Like, it's so much fun. And then I think it can so easily become really serious when you start to take it really like seriously. Yeah. So I try to have a lot of fun, but yeah, it can really feel a little intimidating. I feel like I've heard so many messages about, like, you know, once I started working with publishers, it was like, well, here's how you can ruin this relationship. So it's like, I'm always thinking about like what might happen. But yeah.
Well, it's really, it's like grown-upping, you know? All of a sudden it's a job, not not a fun hobby, right?
Right.
You've got it, like André was saying. All of a sudden you're working.
And it does. I'm also hearing, Darren, what you're saying, that like, and because this is how I feel about it too. Like, the publishing side of it can sometimes, like the traditional publishing side, can feel a little gatekeepery in this way of like, in those relationships, while like they can be so lovely and so fulfilling, and especially when you get to meet people in person, it's so wonderful to get to know who these people are. But I know I also have the fear of like, what if I do something wrong? What if I say the wrong thing? What if, something big happens in my life and I'm late on this deadline? If I get really sick or some big, huge thing happens, like, have I destroyed this relationship that is like one of the few, and they are one of the gatekeepers, and now that gate is closed? Like, that can feel kind of scary, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like it's so hard to remember that the people that you're working with are people, and to recognize that like they're not necessarily trying to gatekeep. I assume, it doesn't feel like that's what people's goal is, but it's so easy to assign that, I think, to the people that you're communicating with. It can feel like, oh, like I really have to please you. you know um yeah, it's difficult.
So on that line of thinking, I'm curious, like, for everyone in here, when you've had a stream run dry, so to speak, either like a person who was a close contact of yours who gave you a lot of work has like left the company that they were working with, or like moved to a different company, um, or like an indie author who fed you a lot of work, or if you used a lot of like ACX to find a lot of stuff and then the quality started to shift. What does that look like for you when like you encounter sort of this new source of scarcity, and like what's one of the best ways to pivot from that?
You know, there is no reward for longevity in this job. There is no gold watch. There is no guarantee of further work. I've had newer narrators say to me, "Oh my God, how do you pick which books you want to read out of all the ones you get offered?" Like they're dropping, a pile of books on my doorstep, and I'm going, no, flicking them away. No, and a part of me gets really pissed about that. I mean, I've been doing this for 20 years, and there are still periods where all of a sudden I'm never going to work again. And my husband is probably upstairs listening to me going, "Oh God, there she goes again. She's never going to work again." If he had $1 for every time he heard that. But it's just a reality that I generally have maybe at least one of those times a year, sometimes two, where things just get a little dry, and I look at an empty calendar ahead of me. And then, of course, you're hearing people on social media go, "Oh my God, I am booked up until 2025. I'm like, shut it. Nobody wants to hear that except your spouse. Okay, just shut her, your mom. But it's just this sort of awareness that we constantly have to be hustling, constantly. So I have taken that. It would happen during those fallow times where I'd be like, I better send out emails. I better, reach out and try and truffle up some work, to realizing that I kind of have to do that year round. I don't wait for a dry spell anymore. I'm constantly reaching out, and it's really kind of debilitating, to be honest, to feel like you constantly have to do that. Part of me wishes there was an agent involved. But then I'd have to pay them 10%. And my agent doesn't want anything to do with audiobooks. They're like, take your stupid low-paying audiobooks, right? But it's just, it never ends, you guys. It just never ends. I'm constantly going after books I think I want, and trying to meet authors and forge relationships and stay fresh. I mean, that's from the little place where I'm sitting, that's the problem that I'm facing. How do I stay relevant in a land of shiny, sparkly new things?
I have a follow-up question to that, like for everyone, since we do have to stay on top of our game and staying relevant, like you say, just being around and available and good, right? Do you also experience maybe different feelings where you feel like maybe you have to explain yourself, or you don't really have that connection with people outside of the industry. Do you ever get that question like, so what are you doing next?
Like you're saying, like when there are people who kind of connecting two thoughts here, and I can do it out loud. Hillary was saying, like, it'd be great if there were agents, and sometimes there's like a team who's going out and managing this for you, and there's almost like, not that every actor lives and works this way, but there can be a schedule that like shoots out ahead of you. And I feel like in audiobooks, I only really see that in folks who mostly work in the indie space, because I feel like they are the ones who are planning the furthest out.
Yeah.
And no one gets that this is gig work, that like I just recorded this book for Macmillan and maybe I will never hear from them ever again.
Ever again. Right. We do not know. Like, we're actors, we don't know when the next thing is coming. Like, we know when we get it. Like, that's when we know. And we either audition or we really, really hustle and bustle it. But yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. That is an interesting point about the indie space.
It dawned on me I don't know when it dawned on me, that what a crappy business plan being an actor is. Like, because you have to plan. Well, because you have to be in the chair to make money. I have to be in the chair to make a penny. That's crappy. I mean, I'm from New York, and all of my friends are in finance. They're like sitting on their yachts making money. I'm like, sorry, I can't go on your yacht with you. I got to sit in the chair and read out loud. It's just, it's a crappy business model, right? Unless we can figure out some kind of
how to
royalty.
License your voice with AI.
I didn't even go there. I was thinking residuals.
Wow. Yeah, royalty sharing. Yeah, but I just think it's not going to happen within the publisher space. I'll tell you that. It's just not.
Yeah.
That horse really has left the barn. It's really a bummer.
It was interesting to learn from SAG-AFTRA that there was one contract in audiobooks that did give
recorded books
residuals.
It's recorded books,
not royalties. And they had to freeze the rate for 3 years in order to get that.
It is actually royalties, André, not residuals.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
It's royalties. It's based on sales. So there's somebody, I got schooled in this the other day, and I won't do it right. But in the steering committee meeting, I kept saying residuals, and they're like, it's not residuals, it's royalties. Because it's a percentage of the sales.
Okay. Oh, and not a percentage of the plays.
Exactly. It's a percentage of sales.
Okay. There was something in my head that was about, like, at least the way I think ACX talks about it, that it's like, this represents like the fact that you didn't get paid a full rate. And now we're like, these payments are about completing. But okay, royalties, plays, residual sales. I was going to say about this, and one of the things that I'm curious about, especially knowing like the books you've done in the time that you've been narrating, Hillary, and also kind of like for you, Dara, like what your dreams and visions are as someone like seeing the road ahead of you in audiobooks is, I feel like, especially for people who are doing like stage or screen acting, it's like, I've got to get my big break. I've just got to be in that one movie. And then all the casting directors are going to be sending me offers, and I'm going to be on the red carpet and da-da-da. And I feel like I had this vision of like, oh my God, you're going to do that New York Times bestselling audiobook. And then everyone's going to just be clamoring all over you, and you're going to be getting offers all the time. And then that's going to ride out for the next 30 years. And I've seen so consistently with all kinds of folks that it's clearly not the case. And I'm curious, like, what, I guess, Dara, like what is that? How does all of that frame in for you as you're like visioning and reaching out and planning?
I have not ever really made like a plan about how I want things to look. I have desires, and they've all been crushed in the past 30 minutes or so, I think.
You're welcome. I'm really good at that.
No, I mean, I guess the biggest thing that I would love to have is like consistency, to be able to consistently be doing this work in some capacity. And I don't want to feel like I'm working super hard. That's kind of like the biggest thing I want to get away from, is just like this feeling of like drudgery and trudging. And that is something that sense of ease and that sense of like I'm doing something that is really enjoyable, is really like how it's felt for me in the past year or so since I started. And so, I mean, just kind of keeping that feeling alive. I mean, that's really my dream, is to continue to feel a sense of ease. And I really like only recently started doing the like more consistent reach outs and things like that. Because I did start like last May in earnest. And so my reach outs were not like, it wasn't like a thing that I was sitting down and doing. And now that I'm doing it more and hearing what y'all are saying, I'm like, okay, so this is just how it is. Like, this is just what I'll be doing until who knows what happens. But yeah, I mean, I guess it's just to feel like I'm having fun, feel like I'm continuing to do things that are exciting and new and different. Because I was working at a desk for a while before I started doing this. I mean, before then I've been acting forever, but like, that I think is what really drove me to say like, okay, I want to do something that feels enjoyable, that I'm not like dreading doing every day. And this is that thing for me. So yeah, just keeping that vibe is really my biggest dream.
Yeah, and it's interesting, like we talked about, combining that ease or that joy you can feel doing the work with the sort of drudgery, as you said, the difficulty of like getting the work and keeping that, that sort of stream flowing, requires a lot of like the less glamorous side, right? And more of the hustle stuff that like brings up a lot of weird emotions, I think. I know I have a lot of weird emotions about hustling and about asking for things and about, putting yourself out and like navigating that relationship between like, hey, I do just want to connect with you as a human, but also like work, please.
Always.
Is it weird that hustling feels different to me than actually asking someone for something? Because making that ask to me is like putting something upon someone. Like it's like, putting someone in a position that maybe in that particular moment, you know what I mean? Like it feels different to me than hustling, because hustling is a necessity. Like this must happen and they know this must happen. But me going, I would really love to do cozy mystery, just sounds different.
Do you mean that
You've
that
never
sounds,
thought of me for that, and I want to do it.
Like that like that's harder? Is that what you're saying, Deanna?
Yeah, it's so weird. And I think it's because there's a closer, like personal connect to that. It's not out of necessity. It doesn't feel businessy to be like, oh, wow, a vampire romance would be everything, right? Because it's like here, like it's not even my heart, like it's right here, like underneath the clavicle, because I want to do it so badly.
See, I think you're doing them a favor doing that. I think that's giving a gift to whoever you're contacting, because they're it. Yeah, because that is giving them a direction of what to do with you, versus those just sort of open-ended, hi, I've got time on my schedule. Well, I don't know where to put you, but to be direct and say, this is what I'd really love to go after right now. That just,
Yeah.
I feel like that's doing people a favor.
I'm going
I
to
don't know.
change it. It's going to be a gift from now on.
It's
I'm not
a
asking
gift.
anything. I'm
No,
gifting
you're like, look at what I'm
the
giving
things
you.
that I would like to put into the universe.
Yeah.
I love it.
New
Thanks,
subject
Hillary.
line. I'm bringing you a gift.
I'm bringing you a gift.
And the gift
It's
today
me.
is
You giving me a book about vampires. Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, you are solving a problem for them because they
You're solving a
want to
problem.
cast this book with somebody who
Exactly.
can do it really well.
Yeah.
They want to cast this book
And
with
then
someone
they'll
who
think
like
of you when they
feels
come
it.
up with that too. You know, you'll be in in their mind. So I think back to the emails that I used to write, reaching out, you know, and I'd write these like essays, these chatty, how you doing? How's your dog? Wow, is the weather? And you know, these long things to get to. Can I have a book? You know, I mean, I've got some time in my schedule. And then I'd send one to like every producer in the company, and I'd change each email because what? I thought they'd be like, I got an email from Hillary. I did too. What does yours say? You know, like what were they going to? She sent the same thing to me. Like they were going to.
How do we share that same fear without like, because I had that fear before anyone like coached me out of it. Lindsey too.
No, me too. I'm like,
it was so stupid. Now I'm like, hi, I want to record this. Bye. I'm barely like, how you doing? I'm like, hi, I've got some free time next month. See ya. Mostly because I'm scared of wasting their time, you know? And also I'm copying everybody else on the same email, which I thought actually I got that from the last panorama. I had Allison Light from Simon & Schuster, and she said, if you email one of us, copy all of us because it saves us the time of telling each other what's going on. Let us see that you copied everybody.
No, see, I was out here being like, okay, well, I will email Allison on Tuesday, and then I will email Taryn on Wednesday.
Yeah,
so
no, you're going to email them
that
all at the same time. I mean, it's such fear, isn't it? It's just, it's
it was
ridiculous.
so funny. At the Audis, at the Audis, a producer walked up to me. We're just catching up, and they're like, "Oh, I have this book that I'm having a really hard time casting." And I one of the things that for me felt like a kind of like flip of like waiting and like hoping that something finds me in the ocean to feeling both proactive but not like predatory about reaching out for books and work was this conversation. And some people like it, some people don't like it. I think like different producers have said like, oh my God, do this. And some have said like, please never do this. Is identifying like an upcoming project that hasn't been cast and then being like, oh, I saw this book is coming out. Like, I'd love to audition for it if like it hasn't been cast yet. And I did that early on, and it was very kind of like hit or miss. Like someone didn't reply, or like someone did, and they're like, I'll jot you down, and I never got an audition. And then a couple times it did come through, and I did get the book, or like did get a chance to audition. But I'm at the Audis, producer comes up, and they're like, oh, like I have this book I'm having a really hard time casting. And it's kind of like, it's like this and this and this. And I'm like, it's not, does the cover look like this? And they're like, I'm not sure. And I open a list on my phone that I keep of like projects to request. And there was one title on that list at the time. And I turned the phone to them and I'm like, is it this project? And they're like, it is that project.
Wow.
And it feels like that was like that feels like this like moment for me about, I guess maybe manifesting joy and manifesting like intention. I don't know. Because there's so much that we do that's like, yes, like we're going to do the regular reach outs. We're going to go to the social. We're going to make the connections. We're going to like build relationships that we value. And I don't say that like, ironically, I really mean that, as opposed to sending these, kind of like, give me work emails. But there was this point of like, kind of like Dara said, like, I want to find joy. I want to feel like I love the things that I'm doing, because one of the hardest things for me to hear is folks who are like, like 45% of my schedule is books that really suck and I hate them, but we just got to pay the rent. But it felt like choosing something to like think about what projects might align, or like you said earlier, like, Deanna, I'm still waiting for someone to give you that, like, the cat helps, solves the murders book. Like,
Even if I have to write it or write it, call me. Yeah. But no, I agree with you, André. And I mean, even maybe adding on to that, kind of like those things that are the things you wake up because you were dreaming about it and you're like, oh yeah, like that would be so, oh yeah, I remember seeing that and I didn't make the note and I think this thing is for me. Or the weird thing where you have different books with different producers and different publishers, but there's a through line, of connectivity. Like, I believe we can create that for ourselves. And it's amazing when it kind of comes together. Like, I got a little goose pimply when you were talking about that book, because I believe what Dara was saying, really enjoying what you are doing, but kind of putting the energy out, already seeking out those things. Even if you're writing your, I really need work right now, email, it's coming through. Because that's the place where you are in that moment. But for real, the gift thing, I'm going to do it. I'm going to tell you, Hillary, I'm going to tell you what happens.
I want to know what happens. Yeah, I'm thinking about that through line kind of thing. And I'm just trying to think about what our whole modus operandi here, which is talking about changes, over the course of the time I've been doing this and all of us have been doing it. And, certainly in the beginning, it was like, yes, I'll read that. Yes, no, don't even show it to me. Yeah, I'll do it. Yeah, I'll do it. Yeah, I'll do it. Yeah. I mean, right. You're just like, you're reading anything in all different genres. And I remember this was a mark for me of when I guess when I felt successful enough to start making choices. Right? That I had enough work to start making choices. And I'm going to hurt you right now with this, Deanna, so don't hate me. But I reached a point where I had mined the vampire porn genre to a point where I couldn't read another one of those. Wish you were around then. Because there wasn't, listen to me. You don't think I did a lot of vampire books? I am a vampire. And where there's never one, there was 10. And I had done them for almost every publisher. And I was like, I got to do something else. I've got to do something else. And I wrote them all saying, no more. And that was kind of a scary thing to do, right? Because it's sort of almost, there was the first big series of things I did. And then I would still kind of do anything. But I'm thinking about, as I saw more and more people entering the marketplace, it occurred to me that two things. One, I want to record books that I want to record. You spend a lot of time with them. And two, I want to slice out my piece of the pie so that people know where to put me, because there's so many people here now doing this. I want to be a go-to person. So that's when I really started focusing on what I love, which are thrillers. And I've made that kind of what I am, what I do. I do thrillers and I do books about women who are like destroyed, either by themselves or by somebody else. I like to say women rising from the ashes of self-destruction like a phoenix. Dark stuff. And it reminds me of the voiceover, commercial voiceover. In the beginning of commercial voiceover, you did everything. First of all, voiceover was totally colorblind, but you tried to be as many voices as you could to fill as many different archetypes and roles as you could. And then that started to change. They're like, no, we don't want you to pretend to be a New York cabbie because we got a real guy who does that. So it wasn't about pretending to be different characters. It was about being who you were. What is the true sound of you that commercials wanted? And so I just started to think about applying that to audiobooks too, to specialize in something so that you become the go-to.
No, that's true. I think niching down can be so important. And you made me think of another big change that I feel like we've seen, or at least I've seen from the outside, is moving from a place where, again, there's a small group of, mostly white narrators who are sort of doing all the books and are doing books that they might not be cast in now, but they were cast in 15, 20 years ago because of how the industry was structured and how it worked. So I think it's a wonderful development that now there is more focus on authentic casting and on matching up an actor who maybe feels that book just under their clavicle with the material in order to make like the best possible, creation out of those two things. But I think that also reverts back to your point of like how important it is to figure out, at least on some level, what your niche might be. Whether it's thrillers, whether it's a genre-based niche or based in the way you identify or in knowledge that you have, or in just like the way that you approach material. If you're like a little more wry or you're a little more earnest or, all of that, because we're all actors. We can all do all the things and we still do all the things, right? When you're approaching a thriller, you're still creating this huge cast of characters who all have different outlooks and different perspectives and different ways of approaching the scary situation they find themselves in.
And different genders and different races
yeah.
and different religions. So you're still doing all those things.
You're still doing all those things. But like the sort of like overarching, like, who is this book about? Who is this book for? Who is the best person to tell this story? What I'm hearing from you and some other people here today is like, how can we show them like the stories that we are best suited to tell and who we are and what we can bring to that material?
Really well put, Lindsey.
It's really making me think so much about like, there was a moment for me where as I was learning more skills, like I did a incidental accent on this book, so I'm going to go put it on my website or whatever, and collecting those little experiences and skills like that. There was a point where I was like, actually, I don't want to ever be considered for the 14-hour book that I have to do in dialect. And there, in the same way, Hillary, that you're like, I want to focus on thrillers. I want to read Women Rising from the Ashes. One thing that I have tried to balance is like being broad. I do like this kind of like variety in my books. Like, oh, last night I was doing this and today I'm doing this. That is really fun for me. There are also things I don't want to do. And I feel like I wonder if it would have counted against you more 20 years ago to have been turning down like something that you might have gotten 10 books of, or like they say, can you do this? And you say you can't. And that would really count against you. And I feel like that's a shift that like represents the fact that so many more narrators are in the field now. There's so many more books being produced. One person can find their voice. They can find the things they focus in on, and they don't have to be expected to do everything. That niche doesn't like, you don't have to specialize in like, Amish romances, but you can zoom in close to the things that you love. And that feels kind of like, maybe to Dara's point, it feels a little bit more nuanced. Like we're in this space where no, we're not gonna have the gold letter that says that we're gonna get a book a week every day for the next 25 years. But there's these kinds of like trade-offs because of those changes in the industry that are giving us more options about what we do, or giving us the ability to go and do that indie book that like didn't have, ACX publishing 20 years ago to even get that story out into the world. And so that's from, the conversation between Lindsey and Hillary, that feels like something that I'm thinking in my head now, like wouldn't necessarily have been the kind of way you could navigate your career at that point.
I think it's a real two-way street also. Like back then, we felt like we had to be able to do everything, and the producers expected it of us because there weren't that many of us. And now they don't expect it of us because there aren't that many of us, and it also allows us to focus more on what we do want to do. So I think that's a benefit for everybody involved. Maybe not the actor who is willing to just do anything all the time, like most of us are. I'll do the job. But it is nice to be able to specialize. I also think, something occurred to me in that, it may seem like you are limiting your potential when you specialize, when you say, I don't want to do something, or this isn't, a good fit for me. It may seem you're limiting your potential, but I think in a lot of ways you're actually expanding your potential because you open up a particular genre or something that you become known for, and then you work more in that, under that umbrella.
This is also making me see sort of that hustle in a different way, because one of the things that prompted me to want to have this conversation is I felt like I felt like I saw this interesting thing happening where people who've been doing this for years and years and years were suddenly either like publicly or in small groups or whatever saying like, "Ooh, things have changed. Things have changed. It's not." And like I've been doing, in terms of getting the work, like I'm sure, all of our work in terms of performance has evolved, but in terms of getting the work, people who had not necessarily evolved their approach that much in the past however many years, suddenly going like, "Oh, I don't know if this path is working for me in the same way anymore. Do I have to adapt? Do I have to change?" I meet people who've been doing this for a long time who've never touched an indie book once in their lives. Like it's just been 100% publisher work. And now that has like shifted or changed a little bit, they're like, how does indie happen? How does it work? What does it look like? And that's not everyone. Some people have like been evolving every single step of the way. But it was interesting to see that go down and then to realize like, oh, the weird like upside of coming in when I did is that I feel like I was like scrappily hustling from day one to, and being like, what's the indie market look like? What are the publishers? How do I ask for stuff? Who am I? What is my niche? Like, I feel like I was clawing and scrabbling for books rather than letting them come to me from the beginning. But hearing this sort of about like where you fit in and how people see you in sort of the books that come to you, I'm grateful that that was part of my approach and had to be my approach if I wanted to make this a career. Because it means that like if I was scrabbling for a book, if I was like reaching after it with my little raccoon paws, then it was a book I really wanted to do. And I was able to build up a portfolio that like, sure, listen, we all have plenty of books in there where we're like, that was my rent check. Thank you so much. I had a lot of fun doing it, but it wasn't like the book of my heart. But I do have some of those books where I'm like, I grabbed it and pulled it to me, and then it led to other things too. But like, it creates a body of work that feels really authentic.
I mean, it's so sort of daunting and impressive for me to see how active a lot of the newer narrators are in crafting their careers. Which, I mean, we didn't even audition back in the day when we walked uphill. We narrated uphill both ways. They just sent you the book. You never auditioned. And so I see these narrators starting their own production companies and going to all these conferences and meeting authors. I'm like, what am I starting channels and clubhouses and podcasts and yeah, it's a little daunting. I feel like you guys have skill sets that I have to learn. And it's hard to teach the old dog the new tricks. I'm trying, but like going after the indie stuff, I don't really know how to do that. I mean, I'm sure I could figure it out, but everybody seems to be really active and engaged with crafting their career, and I find it impressive and scary.
It's also more work, and the fact that like the framework to me of like you have to learn how to do all of it at once in order to work with a production company and just send them raw audio, that doesn't make any sense to me. I know that no one coordinated that process, but the fact that that was the case for years makes no sense to me. I also feel that like I'm a Gen Z elder, right? Like I'm the oldest of Gen Z. And I also feel like the hustle is exhausting for us, for one. Like there are so many points in the past year where like I get a Sovus nomination, the earphone award comes out, whatever it is happens, and people are like, "Oh my God, André, congratulations! Like you're killing it!" And I'm like, "There's nothing on my calendar for the next like 3 weeks," or like I just like the bank account is sitting low right now, or whatever it is, and I feel like so, so much of that is like other conversations, right? But I'm also, I don't know what it looks like short of this just becoming a space like, film and TV where we have agents or we have teams or whatever, for there to be, again, this sense of consistency and stability with the benefits that have like arrived over the past several years. Like, I hate recording at home. Like, I vow stronger and stronger every day to never record at home again.
But you
for
have
so
that
many
fancy
people across
studio
the
bricks
country-
behind you.
I know. I shot off 100 books in there, and I think it's time to wrap it up and put it back in the closet, right? Like, I'm going through a narrative right now, but like, there are so many people across the country that home recording makes this possible for them, period. And they love it. And I'm also, like I said, no one was coordinating that weird setup. I'm not coordinating what the industry looks like. I don't know what like all the right pieces being in place for someone to feel like their career caters to them in all the right ways would look like,
I mean, I just want to punch in and say, with agents for film, TV, and stage, like, that's not necessarily the case for like every actor. Like, your day-to-day journey person, actor, like, we've got that feast and famine. Like, we're still going with the flow. You kind of got to have a name, and not necessarily an award, because I will never forget Halle Berry, because I love her so much, winning the Oscar. And then I was just waiting and waiting and waiting, because that's what happens, right? So, yeah. I mean, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's how the industry was set up and then presented. And then we found a way to work in it, like, it's not the artist's design. To be W-2 would probably be our choice with, healthcare and dental.
I hope someone's taking notes.
Yeah, it is funny sometimes when people are like, oh, you can work, you're freelance and you can work whenever you want and make your own schedule. And I'm like, that can be nice, but let me tell you, if somebody was like, you're going to go into studio 5 days a week from this time to this time, and we're going to pay you a salary and you're going to record books, I'd be like, great, done. Thank you. Amazing.
See you
No,
then.
I love the freedom of being able to create our own schedule. That's the whole bonus for me. I love that, being able to take off whenever you want, or work on a Saturday if you want. Like, what is a weekend? I don't know.
We're all Dame Maggie Smith. We have no idea.
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you for understanding my reference. What is a weekend? But I do like to get out of my house. But my studio is not here, so I get to do that. That's a big deal for me. I know I talk about it all the time, but getting it out the house, because when it's in the house, you live with your work, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I go to it, which makes a really big difference. I think it was a book I was narrating, a short story I was narrating last week, and the woman in it was adjusting to working at home. After the pandemic, they never went back to work. And she said, the way I deal with working at home is I get dressed and I go and I get a cup of coffee and I sit on a park bench for the amount of time it would take me to commute. And then I go home and I go into my office like I'm going to work. And she said, and she does it at the end of the day too. She'd leave her house and go sit somewhere for the amount of her commute time and come back home, just to create that difference, that separation between church and state. Because the worst feeling is, no, you know what? I can record those last 10 pages after dinner. I don't want to record those last 10 pages after dinner. I don't want to, rather than just doing them now, which I did when it was at home. I guess it depends on your work ethic, The laundry might have to get folded rather than these last 5 pages. It's critical. But it's I think what's really great, which is what you touched upon, I guess, is that you can sort of, to a certain degree, tailor this work to your own specifications.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it all connects in terms of the finding the joy in evolution, right? Like as your business evolves, as the industry evolves, as how we get work evolves. I liked Dara talking about finding like ease and joy, and where can we find the joy in the constant hustle, in the having to learn new tricks, in the having to navigate a landscape that does shift and change under our feet in terms of how we get work, how we talk to the people who can give us work, how we seek out new opportunities and try to create, new clients or new streams. Like, change is constant for better or worse. So I think it's a good reminder to like, where's the joy in that change rather than the fear? Because for me, the fear comes really naturally. The fear comes first. And like, oh no, it's changing. Oh no, I just learned how to do it. Now it's changing. But this conversation is a really good reminder of like, okay, the fear is there, but like, where's the joy? Is that there too?
Well, the fear of it changing and eclipsing you is really the overriding fear for me, right? When will this ride stop? And then, so that's a big fear, right? Will this ride stop? I mean, I got into this work because I knew I would age out of commercials. And I figured I would never age out of audiobooks. But there are other things that change. So it may not just be aging out. It may just be the changing landscape. But I don't know. I think as actors, we always have a little fear, don't we? That's what keeps us on our toes. And the drudgery too. Like, it's a lot of work, isn't it? When people are like, oh, I have a picture in their booth. I'm in my happy place. I'm like, really? That's your happy place? Mine's on the beach. Yeah, no, that's my workplace. I mean, sometimes it's happy, but a lot of the times it's not. A lot of the times it's getting through, something. I don't know. It's hard work, even when it's a good book. Even when you really do like it and it speaks to you, it's still hard work. And then I have to say, well, I like to list all the other things, other jobs that are harder, like tarring roofs in Palm Springs. Not doing that.
Absolutely.
I feel like it was interesting to hear Lindsey say that she felt like she started at the right time. Because I said that to myself all the time, where right around 2021, when I got my first publisher job, it felt like all the floodgates are opening. Ahab is launching. All the producers are running around looking for people. They're open to tons of recommendations. All these books are being cast, and you're hearing about all these audition emails going out, and everybody wants recommendations. And in 2023, it felt like that slowed down a lot. Like people were slower to respond, or they had gotten so many inquiries that now there were more systems or more like collective email addresses because there were too many inquiries and not enough demand on the producer side because they've expanded their rosters. They have kind of more people. And so I have that similar feeling of I got to establish relationships right as the floodgates were opening. And so I'm curious, one, if any of that has resonated with Dara and your experience over the past year and what you've seen in your reach outs. But two, if any of the rest of y'all have had that thought in your head of like, I started at the right time, or there was like a benefit to your timeline in audiobooks.
Yeah, listening to your question, it made me think a lot about just starting in 2023 and what that felt like, because I have had a few moments where I'm like, gosh, I wish when my theater job ended in 2020, I didn't like run around lost for 3 years. But I did. So, and I really do. Sometimes I wish that I had gotten into this work back then, but I also recognize that like my path is my path. So I have felt that it is, like when I look at people's trajectories and look at like the things they've done on Audible or whatever, I do sometimes feel like this is much harder now. It's much harder to meet people and to, get people to actually answer emails and things like that. But I don't know. I also feel like it's going. I don't expect floodgates every time I send an email. And so I do get really excited when I do get one back. But yeah, it's been a really good challenge for me working with that feeling of like being rejected every time somebody doesn't answer an email or whatever. Because of course it's not personal, but yeah, it feels very different from what I've heard from a lot of people, getting started when it was a lot easier to meet people in person, and especially being in bigger markets too, being in New York or being in LA. Chicago is not really a big city for audiobooks or for a lot of things. Like, I mean, theater definitely, but it feels like not necessarily that I started at the wrong time, but it doesn't feel like I started at a very optimal time starting in 2023.
Yeah, what felt lucky about my timeline was I started dabbling in 2017, but 2019 is when I was like, okay, I'm doing this for real. And I was able to go to that year's in-person APAC and I don't even think I met any producers, but I met some narrator friends, Kirt and Gail and other people who are like, then when everything closed down, I was like, okay, but now I have some narrator friends as I go into 2020 and try to like navigate this entirely remote. So I had this brief moment where I did get to like be there in person and physically be there and see like, I get this glimpse of what it looked like pre-pandemic to work in the industry. And then immediately that was done. I was thinking about like the 2020 APAC and I was like, listen, last year that was a test run. This is going to be my year. We're like, we're going to do it. It's going to be great. And then obviously, but like there is a part of me that's grateful that like I sort of slipped right in under that wire. But then I look back at like, what it looked like 10 years before I started. I'm like, I wish I'd known about this when I like graduated college,
Well, there are benefits to it and there were detriments, Lindsey, because we didn't have access, like I said in the beginning, you really had to go places to meet any of the people who hired you or via email. Mm-hmm. So that was in some ways a detriment. Nobody went to the Audies unless you were nominated. I always did, whether I was nominated or not, just because I know where my value is, and that is in what I call public relations. I'm really good at a party. I'm not very good in a business structured kind of meeting thing. I'm really good chatting. So somebody said this year at the Audies, when did the Audies become APAC? Because it's so crowded. It never was like that, right? That's a really big change. Now everybody who can goes, whether you're nominated or not, for the reason I've been going all along. It's a great place to meet people. But by the same token, it seems like every single bit of good news comes with the flip side of bad news. So that's great that everybody can go to it. But the flip side is it's much harder to get to talk to people because there's so many people and all the publishers. I mean, there were a couple of them who I talked to beforehand who were like, okay, we're girding up. We're getting ready to fend people off because, it's hard for them. That's a lot, They love it, but it's a lot to just have people constantly coming up to meet you. Can you imagine? So I don't know. I think, so good sides for when I entered, there were like 10 of us. I mean, right? But it was harder to meet people. And there were much bigger gates on the doors to gain entry. So, I don't think there is any one sweet spot to entering this business. I guess maybe there was so much less noise when we were all first doing it. It allowed us to sort of create a body of work and a reputation, without as much noise. So that was certainly a value to that. But like I said, I've talked to a lot of my colleagues from back then who really feel like they're lost in the shuffle, that they're not getting noticed the way they used to. They're not getting the work the way they used to. And they're really lamenting that. And I have tackled that by being aggressive and going after stuff. But that's not within everybody's skill sets. It's certainly not within mine. And I've forced it because I have to work. Financially, I have to work. And I have to work consistently. So I've made myself do outreach and things that do not come naturally to me at all. But it saddens me to see who I consider titans of the industry feeling like they're being passed over.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for joining me today. This was a really fascinating discussion. This is really interesting. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Narrators Roundtable. Thank you to our guest hosts, Hillary Huber and Dara Brown. If you want to join the conversation, find us on social media or visit our website, narratorroundtable.com, to submit a question or a topic of discussion for a future episode. What's on your mind? We want to talk about it.
The Narrator Roundtable is produced and hosted by André Santana, Deanna Anthony, Gail Shalan, Kirt Graves, and Lindsey Dorcus. All copywritten material is shared with permission. Music and sound effects are licensed through Storyblocks Audio. All opinions shared are those of the individuals and do not reflect the positions or policies of any company or organization with which they happen to be associated.